Late last night, news broke that a small plane went down off the coast, and people immediately started whispering one name, Spanian. But what really happened? Was the YouTuber on board? Or is this something even more heartbreaking than we thought? As rumors spread and fans searched for answers, bits and pieces of Spanian's past, his rise from the streets to internet fame, started to surface, making this unfolding tragedy hit even harder. And when you look closely at the strange posts Spanian shared just days before this news broke, a chilling question lingers. Was this an accident? Or was something deeper going on behind the scenes? There's a moment in time that nobody can forget. It's like the world paused for a second, frozen as one strange, heartbreaking story began to unfold. Rumors began circulating about a small plane crash. Some people whispered that Spanian was involved. Others weren't so sure. It was never officially confirmed, and that lack of confirmation only made the entire thing feel more mysterious. Every article and post seemed to drop tiny hints but never gave the full picture. As the news spread across social media, one detail kept surfacing: an image of a battered aircraft, scattered debris, and a crowd of onlookers frozen in disbelief. Spanian's name was on everyone's lips, not as someone who was there for sure, but someone who might have been. What was Spanian doing that day? Where was he supposed to be? And most importantly, was this tragedy truly tied to him, or was this a wild rumor gone too far? The public became obsessed with finding out more. Posts on Reddit speculated endlessly. TikToks appeared dissecting every shred of evidence. Even traditional newspapers, careful as they were, raised an eyebrow at Spanian's curious silence. Every time someone thought they were close to answering one of these questions, they ran into a dead end. And then came the next shocking twist, one that nobody expected, and that took this heartbreaking story in an entirely new direction. Suddenly, what had been a troubling mystery became something darker, deeper, and much more personal to Spanian than anyone could have guessed. Before that tragedy put him under the spotlight, Spanian was mostly known only to a small circle of followers. People who followed his gritty, no-filter style appreciated how real and raw he was. It wasn't long before his videos started going viral, one post after another pushing him further into the public eye. Some followers felt like they were seeing someone truly authentic, someone who wasn't scared to speak their mind. He wasn't polished or media-trained. Spanian was just Spanian, unpredictable, intense, and captivating. That honesty struck a nerve with people tired of glossy influencers. He went from 100 followers to 100,000. Every story he told felt like it had happened yesterday. Every rant was passionate, often angry, and always unfiltered. People kept clicking because they never knew what he'd say next. But with that rise came its own dark undercurrent. Some who'd been close to him before wondered what was happening behind the camera. Was Spanian losing himself to this sudden fame? Was the image that had captivated so many slowly taking over the real person? Rumors about erratic behavior and tense phone calls began to float around. And then, as if overnight, Spanian disappeared from the public eye. Videos went silent. His followers wondered where he was and why nobody could seem to reach him. Little did they know, at the center of this digital vanishing act was a heartbreaking secret that would eventually come to light. One forever changing what they thought they knew about him. If you thought you already knew Spanian, brace yourself. Throughout all his rants, all his personal stories, there was one part of his past he kept fiercely hidden. A part of his story that might explain everything. The plane crash rumors, the disappearing acts, even the harsh edges of his personality that captivated so many. Some of those closest to Spanian, those who rarely spoke up, began to leak bits and pieces. A former childhood friend spoke up on a small podcast, telling a story about Spanian's fear of flying, his long-standing superstitions, and a painful loss he rarely acknowledged. Another person shared a photo that was quickly deleted. Spanian, standing near an airport runway, looking more haunted than heroic. That was when people really started putting the puzzle together. Maybe the rumors weren't about him being in a crash. Maybe they were about someone close to him. Maybe all this time Spanian was carrying around a guilt that nobody ever guessed at. And that's when the story took its most dramatic turn. Almost overnight, whispers grew into theories that would send his followers into overdrive. Every clip was replayed, every caption scrutinized for a hidden message. Could Spanian have been at the crash site before? Could he have left something unsaid for years that was eating him up inside? And just as people thought they had uncovered his biggest secret, someone came forward who changed the story forever. Someone who claimed they had proof of what really happened. That one fateful night became the stuff of legend, described as a dinner with friends that ended far too early. Rumors say Spanian was tense, on edge, and repeatedly checking his phone. The clock ticked past midnight and everyone at the party felt the shift. Some say it was a call that came through. One Spanian answered in the dark outside. Voices raised. Seconds later, he was gone. That was the last time most of them saw him before everything unraveled. And then came the eerie social media post, so cryptic that it had people endlessly decoding its meaning. "Sometimes what we fear most is already behind us," he wrote. Every follower who saw it felt a chill, like they were witnessing someone saying goodbye without saying goodbye. That's when conspiracy forums caught fire. Threads appeared suggesting Spanian had learned something he wasn't meant to. Other comments wondered if the accident was somehow staged, or if Spanian was covering up someone else's role. And still, nobody could explain why, right after that post, Spanian vanished again. Except this time, when he disappeared, he took all his videos, his photos, his entire online persona with him. If people thought they were close to answers before, they were wrong. What happened next would make the whole story feel less like a tragedy and more like a tangled thriller that nobody was prepared for. When Spanian left, something curious happened. Videos that had been public for years disappeared. Followers who had screen recorded them began to wonder if they had witnessed a part of history vanish forever. Then someone appeared with a bombshell claim. They had saved every one of Spanian's videos before he deleted them. They spoke of one clip in particular, a shaky recording that nobody had ever analyzed before. A recording that appeared to show him pacing an empty airfield just after midnight, 1 week before the accident. And as people dug deeper into this newly leaked footage, tiny details became impossible to ignore. The sound of a plane overhead, a whispered phrase nobody could quite make out, even a metallic clinking, like someone was working on something they weren't supposed to. Suddenly, forums weren't the only ones interested. Journalists and law enforcement began to take notice. That was when everything went quiet. The person who posted the clip deleted their account. Major media outlets began pulling their stories. And then came an even stranger twist. Someone leaked a second clip, a voice, Spanian's voice, speaking one final sentence nobody could understand until they read the one report that had never been made public. That report? It changed everything. Once the clips hit the internet, the story exploded in a way no one could have predicted. Every entertainment outlet, from mainstream television to tiny online blogs, jumped on the trail like it was the most important thing on Earth. On morning shows and late-night panels alike, every talking head had a new theory. News anchors sat at their glossy desks, asking the same questions on live television. Was this real? Was it staged? What did Spanian really mean by what he said? Overnight, Spanian went from being a niche internet star to becoming the face of one of the most viral mysteries in years. Someone who seemed to captivate millions with an event they could hardly comprehend. People speculated endlessly. Was this all just one tragic coincidence? Or was there a deeper, darker plan lurking beneath what we thought we saw? Threads on Reddit ballooned into tens of thousands of posts, with every commenter throwing in their own analysis. Influencers who had never spoken about Spanian before rushed to make reaction videos, hoping to catch the wave and add fuel to the already blazing fire. And amid all this noise, one small detail kept surfacing. Someone close to Spanian hadn't said a single word. They weren't just avoiding interviews. They had completely disappeared too. No posts, no sightings, nothing. That silence became deafening. Viewers could feel that whoever this was might hold the key to everything. Who were they? A close family member? An old friend? Maybe an accomplice? Every live stream chat was flooded with people demanding answers. Someone had to come forward eventually. Meanwhile, people kept combing Spanian's videos for clues as though they were treasure maps. Every look into the camera was paused. Every tiny expression was played back in slow motion. Every shaky breath was analyzed by thousands of amateur sleuths, desperate to find some kind of hidden message. The tension was palpable, like waiting for the final pieces of a puzzle to click into place, for that one missing detail to spill into the light. And then, just as everyone was starting to give up hope, as if on cue, someone finally broke the silence. They revealed that Spanian had never been alone that night, and that what happened wasn't what anyone thought. What they had to say would turn everything we thought we knew completely upside down. Just as the story threatened to spiral into pure chaos, Spanian himself finally emerged. Everyone was braced for a heartfelt apology or perhaps a tearful confession. Some even hoped for a neat, satisfying explanation that would wrap everything up. But what they heard was something they never could have predicted. In a short, grainy clip uploaded anonymously, presumably by Spanian himself, he appeared like a ghost returning to haunt his own narrative. The room was so dim it was nearly impossible to make out the surroundings. Only a faint light from a nearby window lit his face, revealing tired, haunted eyes. His voice was trembling, as if he was on the edge of something he couldn't fully control. "You all want the truth," he began in a hushed, tense tone, his eyes scanning the shadows as though someone might burst in at any moment. "And I'm going to give it to you, every last part of it." There was a strange urgency in his voice, as though he had been holding this back for too long, and a trace of fear that unsettled everyone watching. And then, as if by some calculated twist of fate, the video abruptly cut out, leaving nothing but an eerie blank screen. That was all anyone would get for days. People went absolutely wild. Every corner of the internet exploded with questions, theories, and demands for answers. Fans, followers, and even casual observers flooded Spanian's old profiles with thousands of messages and comments, creating hashtags like "I don't saw where is Spanian" and "El Saur Spanian tells all" that trended worldwide for days. Late-night talk show hosts built entire monologues around that 30-second clip, some treating it like a joke, and others like a clue in a high-stakes thriller. Rumors began to grow too. Some people wondered if it was all an elaborate publicity stunt, while others whispered that it had to be a deepfake. And then, just when the hysteria began to simmer down, a new post appeared. This one was a time-stamped clip that hit timelines without warning. And this time, Spanian's face was much clearer. The light was still dim, but his expression was deadly serious. No trace of humor or irony. "There are names," he said, voice lower and steadier now. "Powerful people. People nobody thought were involved." His eyes shifted nervously again, and his hands seemed to tremble slightly as he spoke. Each new sentence only deepened the mystery. The names weren't ones anyone had considered before, and they weren't just any names. They were names that made people realize this was far, far bigger than any of them had ever suspected. And then, just as Spanian was about to say the one thing that could change everything, the video glitched. The screen pixelated into a jagged mosaic. A burst of electronic noise pierced the silence, and then it went black. And once again, the world was left with nothing but the sound of their own racing thoughts and the deafening silence that followed. That was the moment the story took its most devastating turn. Every follower who had defended Spanian was left shaken by the accusations that exploded across the comment sections. What began as whispers and vague suspicions were now loud, undeniable claims that hinted at a secret world most had never seen. Every new post seemed to unravel another layer, and suddenly it felt like the whole narrative was spiraling into chaos. One person claimed they had once been part of Spanian's closest circle, someone who had shared drinks with him at dimly lit bars and heard things they wished they could forget. Another uploaded photos they swore were proof of clandestine meetings, grainy images that seemed to show Spanian with people who weren't supposed to exist. And as each detail spilled into public view, a chilling picture began to emerge. Spanian wasn't the one pulling the strings. Maybe he had been manipulated all along. Or, even more frightening, set up by someone who had spent years earning his trust. And just when that theory began to gain traction, a long-lost collaborator appeared, breaking their silence after months in the shadows. Going live to a stunned online crowd, they spoke in trembling tones as they painted a darker past. They described long nights spent trying to convince Spanian to come clean about everything he had uncovered, futile attempts to shield him from people they could barely name. Throughout the live stream, their hands visibly shook, their eyes darting nervously off-screen as they recounted heated arguments and frightened whispers exchanged in remote places, far away from prying eyes. This was not the Spanian most people thought they knew. This was someone who had been trapped in a story they could neither escape nor control. And then came the most disturbing part of all. The collaborator claimed they had proof that Spanian had anticipated this exact outcome, that he had left behind encrypted files, cryptic voice memos, and a list of names. Names that, if ever revealed, could destroy entire careers overnight. They spoke of nights spent decoding these messages together, wondering who could possibly want Spanian silenced forever. And at the center of all this chaos was one heartbreaking question that nobody could shake. Who was Spanian truly trying to protect that fateful night? Why had he carried such a dangerous burden all by himself? The more people dug, the darker and more tangled the story became, leaving everyone wondering if they'd ever really known Spanian at all. After all the clips, all the statements, all the rumors and fake-outs swirling around the story, people were left staring at one thing: a crumpled, water-stained letter that Spanian had apparently written just days before the accident. The pages were fragile, the ink blurred in places as if soaked by rain or maybe even tears. Every word felt like a confession, peeling back a part of Spanian that no one had ever seen before. In it, he spoke about fears that kept him up at night, fears so raw and personal they felt almost too real to read. There were debts too, the kind nobody had suspected he owed, debts that weren't about money but about promises broken, obligations left unfulfilled. Spanion's voice was tired in those words, as if he had been carrying these burdens for far too long. He described a deep sadness, not just for himself but for someone else who had been caught up in this terrible spiral too. Someone who never sought the spotlight but had been pulled into its harsh glare. Someone who deserved better, and most startling of all, Spanian spoke about a mysterious figure who had disappeared completely after the crash, someone the media hadn't even acknowledged. This person wasn't named outright, but every detail hinted that they had been central to the story. Why was nobody talking about them? What did they know? As details from the letter leaked one by one, a darker, more complicated picture took shape. Spanian wasn't just some controversial star who had lost his way. He was someone trapped between forces larger than him. The letter hinted at powerful threats and hinted that someone had pushed him into choices that would lead to that final, terrifying night. And every time people thought they had the full story, some tiny overlooked detail would emerge that shattered what they thought they knew. A subtle shift in Spanion's tone, a vague reference to a face he never named, all of it suggested that this wasn't just a freak accident at all.
So many questions hung in the air. Was Spanian truly spiraling out of control on his own? Or was someone orchestrating this collapse from the shadows? People paused, rereading the words again and again. It became clear that the heartbreaking tragedy of Spanian wasn't just about one plane or one night. It was about years of struggle, fear, and silence that nobody truly saw. And just when everyone thought they had finally fit all the puzzle pieces together, there was one last twist hidden between the lines of that battered letter, one final secret nobody could have predicted, something that would change everything they thought they knew. In the end, what emerged wasn't a tidy resolution, it was something far more tangled, a portrait of a life that was far more fragile and complicated than most had ever imagined. Spanion's last words, finally revealed in their entirety after so much speculation and silence, spoke less of conspiracy or cover-ups and more of sorrow and regret. He hoped people would come to see that the mistakes he made were never entirely his own, that they had been shaped by pressures and fears so few could truly understand. Beneath the public image, as brash, outspoken, unpredictable, was a man who had, at his core, simply been trying to shield someone who mattered more to him than fame, status, or attention. And so, as new evidence appeared, fleeting glimpses of personal messages, fragmented recordings, and scattered accounts, it vanished almost as quickly as it surfaced. Still, one fact became impossible to overlook. Spanian was never just the character most people thought they knew. In the days and weeks after the tragedy, followers continued to debate his story. Tributes poured in. Memes became more like eulogies, and clips were shared not to provoke or dissect, but to remember him, the raw, unpolished person who had somehow become an anchor for so many strangers. They spoke of his struggles, his humor, and his contradictions, creating a chorus of voices that reached far beyond what the headlines could capture. And perhaps that was the most heartbreaking part of all, that even after all the rumors, all the leaked videos, all the noise and controversy, nobody could truly say they had ever fully understood Spanian. But they also knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was someone who deserved to have his story told. Every chapter mattered, even the painful and imperfect ones. And as the camera slowly fades to black, that lingering question remains suspended in the silence. Who was Spanian really, and what did he leave behind for the world to uncover? Perhaps it wasn't fame or infamy that would define him, but the deeper, more human need to be seen, to be heard, and to leave a mark, however fragile, that would last long after the noise was gone.